Did you know that even the king of rock and roll had bad days in the studio? Could some of Elvis Presley's most promising recordings have been ruined by subpar production decisions? Ever wonder what could have been if different choices had been made behind the mixing board? Elvis Presley remains one of the most influential musical artists of all time, with a legacy that spans decades and transcends generations. His unmistakable voice, matic stage presence, and cultural impact are undeniable. Yet behind the scenes, not everything was perfect in the King's recording career. Some of his potentially greatest works were hampered by production issues that prevented them from reaching their full potential. Let's explore 5 instances where questionable production choices may have sabotaged what could have been truly legendary Elvis recordings. Number 1. Suspicious Minds, 1969. Who doesn't recognize the iconic fake ending and fade back in on Elvis's massive 1969 hit, Suspicious Minds? This song gave Elvis his first #1 hit in 7 years and helped revitalize his career after his famous '68 comeback special. But did you know that the most controversial production decision on this track nearly caused a studio meltdown? Producer Felton Jarvis made a creative choice that has divided fans and critics for decades. Near the end of the song, around the 3:36 mark, Jarvis decided to fade the song out, only to fade it back in again before its conclusion. This artificial ending occurs right when Elvis and his band are reaching the emotional peak of the performance. Elvis himself reportedly hated this production trick. The session musicians who played on the track were equally displeased. Drummer Ronnie Tutt later commented in interviews that the fade-out fade-in effect completely disrupted the natural crescendo they had built during the recording session. The original no-cur, Mark James, was also disappointed with the decision. In later interviews, James revealed he felt the production choice undermined the emotional impact of the song's climax. The decision was particularly frustrating because the basic track itself was phenomenal. Elvis was in fine voice, the TCB band was tight and energetic, and the background singers added perfect texture. Despite these production issues, Suspicious Minds became a massive hit and is now considered one of Elvis's signature songs. One can only imagine how much more powerful the track might have been if allowed to reach its natural conclusion without the gimmicky fade manipulation. The recording still shankes Elvis at the peak of his vocal powers, but the unnecessary production trick stands as a moment of what could have been in the King's discography. Number 2. A Little Less Conversation. Original 1968 version. Can a song be both ahead of its time and held back by its production? In the case of Elvis's A Little Less Conversation, the answer seems to be yes. The original 1968 recording of A Little Less Conversation was featured in Elvis's film, Live a Little, Love a Little. At the time of its release, it was considered a minor track, barely making a blip on the charts and quickly forgotten by all but the most dedicated Elvis fans. The song was written by Mac Davis and Billy Strange, and it had all the elements of a potential hit, catchy hooks, contemporary lyrics, and Elvis's unmistakable vocal style. However, the original production of the song sounds noticeably dated, even for 1968 standards. The arrangement featured rather thin-sounding horns, overly polite background, vocals, and a somewhat restrained performance from Elvis himself. The tempo felt sluggish compared to what the song seemed to demand. The mix buried some of Elvis's vocal nuances beneath layers of instrumentation that lacked punch and vitality. The proof of the song's potential came decades later, when Dutch DJ Junkie XL remixed the track in 2002. This remixed version, which stripped away much of the dated production and emphasized Elvis's vocals and the song's inherent groove, became a worldwide smash hit. The remix topped the charts in more than 20 countries, something the original version never came close to achieving. Music historian Ernst Jorgensen later commented that the original recording session for A Little Less Conversation was rushed with minimal takes and little attention to sonic details. The song was treated as merely another soundtrack obligation rather than a potential single. Elvis himself reportedly showed interest in the song's more modern lyrical approach, but wasn't given adequate time to fully explore its possibilities in the studio. The stark contrast between the reception of the original version and the 2002 remix demonstrates how production choices can dramatically impact a song's commercial appeal and artistic legacy. Had the original been produced with more energy and contemporary flair, it might have become one of Elvis's signature hits decades earlier. Number 3, Way Down, 1976. How could Elvis's final lifetime hit have been sabotaged in the studio? Way Down, recorded in October 1976, became the last single released before Elvis's death in August 1977. The song eventually reached number 1 on the country charts and number 18 on the pop charts, respectable showings that were helped by the surge of interest following Elvis's passing. However, the recording of Way Down suffers from numerous production issues that obscure what was actually one of Elvis's most committed vocal performances from his later years. Despite battling health problems, Elvis delivered a remarkably strong and authoritative vocal take, shouting his still impressive range by hitting the memorable low notes that punctuate the song. The problems begin with the overall sonic muddiness of the recording. The mix lacks clarity, with Elvis's voice often fighting against a wall of indistinct instrumentation. The backing vocals, while featuring the talented J.D. Sumner hitting his famous low notes, are mixed so prominently that they sometimes overshadow Elvis himself, a peculiar choice for a solo artist's record. Perhaps most problematically, producer Felton Jarvis decided to apply heavy electronic effects to Elvis's voice during post-production. These included excessive reverb and a primitive form of doubling that gives parts of Elvis's performance an unnatural, almost synthetic quality. These effects were likely an attempt to mask some vocal limitations or to create a more contemporary sound, but they ended up diminishing the authentic power of Elvis's delivery. Session musician David Briggs later revealed in interviews that Elvis had expressed dissatisfaction with the excessive production effects being applied to his recordings during this period. According to Briggs, Elvis preferred a more natural sound that highlighted the organic interaction between his voice and the musicians. Audio engineers who have studied the master tapes confirm that beneath the layers of processing, Elvis's raw vocal takes were impressively strong. This makes the heavy-handed production all the more frustrating for Elvis enthusiasts. Had Way Down been presented with a cleaner, more straightforward production approach, it might be better remembered as evidence of Elvis's enduring vocal abilities, even near the end of his life. Number 4. Burning Love, 1972. Would you believe that one of Elvis's most energetic rock recordings was almost ruined in the mixing process? Burning Love, released in 1972, became Elvis's last top 10 hit on the pop charts during his lifetime. The song has since become a staple of Elvis compilations and is widely considered one of his best recordings from the 1970s. But the path to that success wasn't without significant production hurdles. The basic tracking session for Burning Love produced a phenomenal performance. Elvis delivered a fiery vocal, and the band played with genuine rock and roll energy that had been missing from many of his recent recordings. The raw elements of a classic were all there. However, when it came time to mix the song, producer Felton Jarvis made several questionable decisions. Most notably, he buried the electric guitar parts that gave the song its rock edge. In the final mix, the lead guitar is pushed so far back that it's barely audible during crucial sections. Contemporary rock productions of the era typically highlighted guitar work, but Burning Love did the opposite. Additionally, the drum sound lacks the punch and presence that characterized other rock records of the early 1970s. While drummer Ronnie Tutt delivered a solid performance, the production diminishes the impact of his playing through a muffled mix and minimal bottom end. Perhaps most egregiously, someone in the production chain decided to add a layer of syrupy strings to the track. These orchestral elements are completely at odds with the raw rock and roll spirit of the song and serve only to soften its impact. They're particularly noticeable during the song's bridge, where they compete with rather than complement Elvis's vocal intensity. James Burton, Elvis's legendary guitarist, later expressed disappointment about how his guitar parts were treated in the final mix. In interviews, Burton noted that he played a much more prominent and aggressive guitar part than what appears in the released version. Despite these production missteps, Burning Love still managed to become a hit, largely on the strength of Elvis's committed performance and the song's inherent catchiness. Elvis historian Peter Gronick has suggested that, with a more appropriate rock production, Burning Love might have been even bigger and possibly altered the commercial trajectory of Elvis's later career by repositioning him more firmly in the contemporary rock scene. Number 5. In the Ghetto, 1969. Can a powerful song overcome production choices that work against its message? Few Elvis recordings carry the emotional and social weight of In the Ghetto, a poignant narrative about poverty and the cycle of violence in America's inner cities. Released in 1969, the song represented a departure for Elvis, tackling serious social issues that were rarely addressed in his music. Elvis delivered one of his most sensitive and nuanced vocal performances on this track. His restrained delivery perfectly captures the song's melancholy tone and enhances its storytelling impact. Songwriter Mac Davis later praised Elvis's interpretation, saying he brought exactly the right emotional quality to the lyrics. However, producer Felton Jarvis and arranger Bergen White made several production choices that nearly undermined the song's power. The arrangement includes an overly lush orchestration that sometimes veers into sentimentality, threatening to tip the delicate balance of the song into melodrama. The string sections in particular are mixed prominently and occasionally overshadow the more subtle aspects of Elvis's performance. The background vocals also present a production issue. While technically well performed, they're arranged in a style more appropriate for Elvis's ballads than for a song addressing serious social issues. Their oohs and ahs create an almost dreamlike quality that seems at odds with the gritty realism of the lyrics. Perhaps most problematically, the percussion track includes an odd clicking sound, similar to finger snapping, that creates an almost casual, lighthearted rhythm pattern that conflicts with the song's grave subject matter. This percussive element trivializes the weighty narrative and creates a tonal disconnect between the lyrics and the musical accompaniment. Audio engineer Mike Moran, who has studied the session tapes, noted that earlier takes of the song featured a more stripped-down arrangement that better served the lyrical content. According to Moran, there were discussions in the studio about keeping the production more minimal, but the final decision went in favor of the more elaborate arrangement we know today. Despite these production issues, In the Ghetto became one of Elvis's most acclaimed recordings and reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. The power of Elvis's performance and Mac Davis's lyrics ultimately transcended the questionable production choices. Still, one can't help but wonder if a more appropriate production approach might have resulted in an even more able recording, one that could have cemented Elvis's reputation as an artist capable of meaningful social commentary alongside his rock and roll innovations. What other hidden gems in Elvis's vast catalog might have suffered from poor production decisions? Could some of his forgotten tracks actually be masterpieces buried under inappropriate studio treatments? Will future generations get to hear remastered or remixed versions that finally reveal the true potential of these recordings?